I have thanks every day. It doesn't take a 10-year anniversary to remind me of what happened. I'm reminded of it every day of my life. And every day it usually starts out as a pretty cool deal. I mean, I'm going, yahoo, I'm here. Nerve damage in my eyes, which is not going to change. I mean, it just gets worse as time, I mean, like everybody's eyesight goes bad, mine just going to be a little bit quicker, you know, given the fact that there's nerve damage. And hearing loss in one side, which leads to like a constant high-pitched ringing, which there is no cure for. You just kind of like get over it. I mean, I can remember them a few moments clearly, but it's not a haunting at all. It's just something that happened. I don't have any feeling one way or the other towards it, you know. Not at all. It's just not something that even occupies a second of my time, you know. But I do remember it, that part of it, for a brief moment. The rest of it's all nothing. It didn't change me like the way I think about things. It mostly changed me financially in the worst way. So if anyone was succeeding, people were apologizing for something because they thought I was angry at them for what had happened by somebody else. And God, no, not even. What people seem to forget, it was black folks that saved my life. Isn't that kind of odd? On one hand, there's some out there to try to kill me or do me in. On the other hand, they're trying to save me because I'm not the enemy. And believe me, I am not the enemy. There's idiots in every group of people. You can go down the list of any nationality, and you can just pick out a handful of idiots in every single one of them, including people that look like me. There's a lot of us idiots running around. Do you want to go after them and smack them around for what? You know, I mean, for example, what did it do? What did it get them thinking that doing something to me was going to change their situation? It did absolutely nothing except get them in more trouble. You know, I don't get it. This just put out the fire with gasoline, for God's sakes. You know what I mean? What did it do for them? Nothing.
There's a drugstore that's really filling up.
That heat must be intense there where you're standing.
It's worse.
Children to steal. I mean, breaking the windows down and pushing the kids in the store to steal.
Pan left, dog, pan left.
They can't be everywhere, but
there they are. There are the suspects, and they are in the process of being...
This is how most people saw the city, but that was only the outside look on Los Angeles. Los Angeles was poor. Many people had no homes, jobs, and slept on the streets. Gang activity was big, and education was poor. There were many immigrants in the city causing tension. LA had a rivalry between Koreans and blacks. This all started with Latasha Harlins on March 16, 1991, at a Korean store.
Girl, Latasha Harlins, was shot and killed by a merchant in South Central Los Angeles. The merchant, Sue Ja-du, was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. Her sentence, 5 years probation, no jail time.
The judicial system is so corrupted.
LA had much police brutality too. Most of it was focused in the black communities, referring to disturbances there with the code "no humans involved." The LAPD had a very big above-the-law attitude. On March 3, 1991, Rodney King was pulled over for speeding. Resisting arrest and accused of being intoxicated, he was brutally beaten by 4 LAPD officers from a group of 15. Unaware of the officers' knowledge, a neighbor had recorded the entire incident. Later, the video would be released to the press. King was beaten for about a minute and a half. The officers had struck him over 40 times, causing serious injury and brain damage. The officers were put on trial. Officer Briseno, Officer Kuhn, Officer Powell, and Officer Wind were all tried for excessive force and assault with a deadly weapon. The trial was moved to Simney Valley, and at 3:15 April 29, 1992, the jury came to the verdict of not guilty. This is when the riots began.
I don't believe this stuff. I just can't.
The people were outraged. Assaults were made on innocent people. One of the most famous incidents on the first day was the attack on Reginald Denny, a truck driver. At Florence in Normandy, he was pulled out of his truck and beaten half to death by Damian Williams and 5 other people. Williams took a piece of concrete and slammed it against Denny's head, and then he celebrated. Denny barely survived. Later, the police were withdrawn from LA, 110 freeway was closed, and Mayor Bradley set a curfew. On day 2 of the riots, LA began to burn. The riots were more organized and more destructive. Shops were being broken into, and in the Korean part of the city, Korean store owners began to arm themselves. They got into gun battles with any looters and blacks that came around them. The police had left them to fend for themselves and their stores, and the National Guard wasn't present. They let the city burn. On day 3 of the riots, the violence had not lessened. There were more fires, more lootings, and more violence than ever. The city was up in flames. Rodney King made a public announcement that day.
I just want to say, can we all get along? Can we get along?
He hoped the announcement would help, but the people were beyond understanding. Bush ordered our own troops to LA that day. On day 4 of the riots, order began to restore. The National Guard had arrived and began to take the city back over. But some places were untouched by the new enforcement. The fires still burned. Random violence continued for days even after the National Guard had arrived. Businesses were still being burned and destroyed. On day 5, the city was coming back. Highways were reopened. Bradley lifted the curfew in LA. Los Angeles was returning to normal. LA was being taken back over by the police force, with help from the National Guard. The National Guard first used deadly force this day by shooting a man that attempted to run them down. The city began to bounce back to normal. The community was seriously hurt by the riots. Lootings and business damage crippled stores. Some had to close for good. Fires burned down homes and left many people homeless. The community looked like a war zone. Many people began to start the long process of repairing their city they helped to destroy. Along with the cleanup of the city came the cleanup of the LAPD. New rules came in against brutality and how to handle arrests. Cops began to be less violent when arresting people, but change doesn't always come quick. There were still some problems with brutality. Los Angeles hasn't fully recovered from the riots of 1992. The damage was fixed, but the scars will not go away. The neighborhoods are cleaner, but many people are still homeless and on the streets. The majority of LA lives in the ghetto houses quickly rebuilt after the fires. Though the scars are being covered and the police are being fixed, the people will never forget the riots that caused the City of Angels to burn to the ground.